This video was made possible thanks to my supporters, especially Drowsy Lemon and Clownkeeper. Thanks so much, everyone. So, Sonic the Hedgehog, the first game in a long-running franchise. Regardless of what you think about Sonic in the modern day, you do have to admit that he was once a marvel in the gaming space. He became Sega's mascot and spent years having one of the greatest rivalries with Mr. Video Game himself, Mario. But how did we get to this point? The year is 1983. Ooh, ominous, right? E.T. the video game had just caused quite possibly the worst thing to ever happen to the video game industry to date. Maybe only just beaten out by Mario Party 10? The video game crash of 1983. The crash of 1983 caused console developers and Activision, I'd say game developers but there weren't really many outside of them, to panic. No sales, bad publicity. Could this have been the end of video games as a whole? Thank Lord for Nintendo, I assure you that's the first time anyone has ever said that. Nintendo had just released the Famicom in Japan, quite possibly one of the best video game systems ever. Now, since the video game crash of 1983 was only really happening in the US, this wasn't really doing much for them over here. Luckily enough for them, Nintendo had the bright idea to expand their endeavours to America with the NES, or the Nintendo Entertainment System. So anyways, the NES dominated the market, leaving Sega's Master System to fail outside of Brazil, and left their mascot Alex Kidd to rot. Sega needed a new mascot, and fast, so they ran a design competition within the company, and it was Naoto Oshima's hedgehog design that had won. A blue colour scheme inspired by the Sega logo, bright red and white shoes to contrast. This was it, Sega had just found their brand new mascot. It wasn't until 1991 in which this new mascot would officially debut. At this point, Sega's brand new console, the Genesis or Mega Drive outside of the US, wasn't doing as amazingly as Sega had hoped. Nintendo's 8-bit console was still dominating the market. Every kid was asking their mom for a copy of fucking Clu Land. Okay, maybe not every or even any kid, but you get my point. No one wanted a Genesis. That was until Sonic the Hedgehog arrived on store shelves. Sonic the Hedgehog was a hit almost immediately with so many people around the globe. He was snarky, rude, and most importantly, he was cool. Sonic instantly became a household name, being loved by people of all ages, and Sega was going crazy with their advertisements for this little guy, and even ending up bundling the game with every Genesis sold to extend its reach. Sonic was absolutely everywhere, but was the first game really as good as people say it is? Now, don't get me wrong, I've seen quite the mixed opinions on the original Sonic the Hedgehog, but I've also seen countless people say the franchise peaked here. Okay, maybe countless is a lie, but I've seen a small handful of people say such things. Well, without further ado, let's get into the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog opens with this absolutely fantastical title screen that encapsulates everything the character stood for. That wagging finger and proud smirk showcase Sonic's attitude very well. The screen's background is elegant. The tall mountains, the luscious green trees and the beautiful blue water. This showed you from the get-go that this was like no other video game. Once you press the start button, you're flung right into the first level. No save menu or password screen, just right into the action. Green Hill Zone, whilst tired and boring these days, is quite possibly the best Sonic Zone. There's a reason they constantly bring it back in newer installments. You know, for reasons that aren't money. It's the same as the title screen really. The tall trees, bright blue water and big mountains let you know that this is a beautiful place that's actively lived in. As much as you might be sick of this level coming back, you do have to admit that it's incredibly beautiful and sets such an amazing first impression. To add to this, scattered around the stage are, obviously, enemies. The colours they use, the hard reds and deep blues, they contrast really well to the background and of course Sonic himself. All of the enemies in this game have such unique and interesting designs for Sonic's first ever outing. Some of these designs are incredibly memorable. This first Motobug here is pretty much Sonic's 1-1 Goomba, quite possibly the most iconic enemy from the series. Anywho, Green Hill's level design is insanely well thought out. Each level has 3 pathways. A bottom path, which is usually the slower and harder path, a top path, which is usually the faster path with less enemies and more rings, and a middle path, a nice balance between the two. Every level in the zone uses this structure, each part having their own unique little challenge or feature. The bottom path of Green Hill's first act has these big loops with little secrets hidden on top of them. The top path is usually the more open one, sometimes stopping the action and giving you some slower platforming moments, which you can also access from the middle path if you're good enough. Regardless of which path you pick though, this game is incredibly fast. Now, Sonic's gameplay is based entirely on momentum, with each stage being filled with slopes and loops. Each of these just give you huge bursts of speed. For loops, usually slow to enter but come out with a bunch of speed. You know, it's how actual physics work. I mentioned rings just now, and for those of you who have absolutely no clue what Sonic the Hedgehog is, and have somehow stumbled on this video, hi, I guess. I hope I'm entertaining enough for you. And you might like to know how the game's life system works. Since Sonic doesn't have any traditional power-ups like Mario, where he can grow or gain an additional power, he has to come up with another solution: rings. Throughout the stage are these weird little things called rings. If you collect them, you keep them. Until you get hit, that is, to which they'll scatter everywhere, giving you a chance to recollect them. The ring system is honestly somewhat flawed. If you've only a single ring, then you're set, proving you can keep hold of just one ring. You don't need any more. I mean, not unless you're dying for an extra life. Ha, get it? Dying for an extra life? Because okay, I'll stop. If you get a hold of 100 rings at a single time, you'll get given an extra life. A pretty nice reward that acts as an incentive for players to actually engage with the level design. Speaking of engaging with the level design, now it's time for the fun part of the review, the power-ups. Might as well get out of the way now before we move on to other things. The game has 2 power-ups, and another special monitor. First, I want to talk about the shield power-up and how I believe it to be insanely well designed. The shield can be obtained by breaking the appropriate monitor, no shit, and grants you an additional hit. If you've no rings, then you get a second chance at life. Instead of saying, oh god damn it, you gotta say, oh fuck you, because losing a shield sucks, man. It pairs well with the ring mechanic since it prevents you from having to recollect all of your rings and waste time away from the end of the level. Giving it only a single hit as opposed to 2 or 3 is insanely smart, and doesn't just feel like an instant win button as soon as you grab one, especially considering you're still vulnerable to pits and being crushed. Exactly the same as our other power-up on here, invincibility. This power-up, well, take a guess what it does. If you said it turns you invincible, you'd be partially correct. Whilst it does immediately pop enemies and prevent you from taking any damage from spikes, it does not stop you from being crushed, falling down pits, or even suffering by the hands of the game's buggy code thrusting you through the ground. Thanks, f***head. And the final special monitor is just an extra life. Wow, amazing. Thank you, Sonic Team, for a brilliant additional power-up. Oh, okay, so hi, I completely forgot to mention the speed shoes monitor, which literally just makes you a bit faster, and the rings monitor, which gives you 10 rings. Again, nothing special like the extra life. I don't really necessarily think that's too interesting. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. Anyways, finish the level, get your results, and move on to the next level. I mentioned earlier that each zone has multiple levels known as acts. Each zone in this game is divided into 3 acts. A first and second act that are just normal get-to-the-goal romps, and a third one that ends with a unique boss fight for the area. Whilst I'm not going to discuss every single act in detail, I will go over the zone as a whole and its associated boss fight. Green Hill Zone's boss fight is against the game's big bad guy, Dr. Robotnik. On the stage are 2 platforms, Dr. Robotnik and his wrecking ball. The boss fight is actually insanely cool. It's simple, yet gives you a good idea on how the bosses are going to work in this game. They aren't just a simple jog past this guy and grab the axe, or pop this guy on the head 3 times, but instead you have to avoid his attacks and hit him a whopping 8 times. Might not sound like much these days, but unless you were a Castlevania fan, this was somewhat unheard of. Once defeated, he runs away like the little motherfucker he is, and you get to free your little animal buddies. The next zone is, unfortunately, Marble Zone. You'll see why this zone makes me so miserable as we go on. Remember that whole thing I mentioned about each level following the 3-path structure, which allows for fun level design whilst also being fast? The thing that every single Sonic level design should aspire to follow? Yeah, well, forget about it entirely. This entire zone has 1 path per level for you to follow, not counting the very beginning of the 3rd act, which is a slight shortcut route. Rather than having the level design be fun and original, great, I'm right back in 8-4 from Super Mario Bros. What is this? This isn't Sonic, this is just a generic platformer. That's not even a joke, that's just a statement. And what's worse is you're actively punished for going fast. If you don't wait here, then you die. Don't want to push this block and sit and wait? Then I guess death is on the table for you. I don't understand how you can advertise your game to be all about speed, but then have entire locations that punish you for trying to do that. Anyways, I love the scenery here, I really do, but I cannot stress how painful the level design is to get through. It's not a series of well-timed jumps or well-thought-out pathways, it's just a boring time pushing blocks, waiting on blocks, avoiding lava. This is such a boring level to get through. Now, if you've played this game as long as I have, it won't take you very long to get through. But if you're new to the game or haven't touched it in a while, this becomes such a slog to get through. The level design here doesn't challenge you, it just minorly inconveniences you. Like the spike, completely hidden till you're there. The spring, oh fuck you too then, asshole. But get through this absolute bore fest of a zone, and you're met with what I think is a really fun and well-designed boss fight. Robotnik's got a fire dispenser. Having the lava in the middle here is a nice touch and adds challenge and variety to the fight. So, Robotnik will move side to side and dispense fire on one of the platforms, which then spreads, forcing you to temporarily migrate to the other side, giving you a chance to hit him. Honestly, a really well designed boss here, far better than the Green Hill Zone one in my opinion. Next up is Springyard Zone, what is, funny enough, a really odd mix between the gameplay of Green Hill and Marble Zone. Whilst not quite achieving the 3-path structure, Springyard does have a few alternate pathways throughout its acts. It's primarily just one up and one down, but with the occasional shortcut sprinkled in there. But I guess they tried. This is still a really slow zone though. There are a lot of parts here that just involve standing on these large metal blocks and waiting for them to move. You do this about 4 or 5 times throughout the 3 acts, which really ends up leaving a bad taste in my mouth. There are portions of this zone that are fast and excellent little bits where you can gain momentum, therefore resulting in more speed, but it doesn't really seem to last for very long as you thrust it into these drawn out platforming segments. I do like the visuals here, going for a pretty drastic contrast between the last 2 zones, which go for a bright environment and a slightly muted colours environment respectively. This entire zone is just brown and dull oranges, with a few small highlights here and there to juxtapose the rest of it. Hey, hang on, does that fucking sign say co-op? Listen, I know I'm not great at this game, but you're not gonna be rude about it. Springyard has some insanely unique level and enemy design. I think whilst mostly slow, tight and annoying at times, Springyard really has some potential that unfortunately wasn't reached and seemingly never will be. It looks like we're reaching the end of Sonic Team reusing old level themes and names, which in one way, thank God, but in another it's kinda sad that we won't ever see levels like this one brought back for another chance. What can you really do about it, I suppose? I'd rather see brand new original zones than Sky fucking Sanctuary for the 3rd time. Has an okay boss fight though, nothing glamorous, yet nothing necessarily boring. Robotnik's gotten himself a little spike, well, okay, maybe it's got a great personality. Robotnik will patrol side to side as is common for boss fights in this game, and once he's underneath you, he'll lower himself and stab the block underneath, breaking it in the process. This is the point where you do your thing and damage him. I really do like the concept of having the platform slowly crumble away piece by piece, and it's made even better by the fact it's not just starting at one side or removing one block from the left side and one from the right. The fact that it's sporadic is really interesting and a great way to spice up what could have been an incredibly boring boss fight. Springyard is honestly just pretty forgettable for me. It's nothing too standout, yet nothing too boring or annoying enough to be memorable. It's just a zone? Never really on the mind outside of just remembering it exists when discussing Sonic 1. Our next zone though is quite the memorable one, and it's unfortunately not for any good reasons. Labyrinth Zone is up next, and I'm not looking forward to it. This zone might single-handedly be the worst zone in Sonic history. I started with gameplay for the other zones, so it only feels fitting to start here with this one. What the fuck is this? 90% of the gameplay here is underwater, fine for literally any other platformer as, you know, you can swim, but not for Sonic the fucking Hedgehog. The physics here are slightly skewed, the jump height, the jump length, the speed, it's all off from what you're used to. Fine for the most part, sure, I can tolerate this, but what I can't tolerate are these fucking bubbles! Sonic can drown, an unfortunate thing for sure unless you fucking despise hedgehogs, and that'd be okay if the bubbles weren't placed in such shitty locations. I cannot stress enough how awful the placement here is. Just when you get into a sticky situation, a bubble is there. But it's placed either in a position where the bubble will just float off through the walls, or it just won't spawn in time, and you're taunted by looking at it spawn as Sonic submerges. Sometimes the bubble locations aren't necessarily an issue, just the rate at which they spawn. Sometimes I'll make a jump and a stupid f***ing bubble just decides to spawn in when I don't need it and stop me from getting to where I need to be. Or sometimes the opposite just for kicks. Not to mention this whole place is absolutely littered with spikes and platforms that crush you, alongside poorly added places that are insanely hard to reach. This entire zone is just a mess. It's cluttered and too tight. I enjoy the concept here, an underwater maze covered in traps and hidden enemies. It sounds great, but in execution it's really bad. A lot of enemies here just pop out of nowhere with very little indication, or sometimes they pop up as you fall if you've no rings, which is very common in this zone. You just die! Whoops, skill issue, am I right? Now, the primary gripe I have with this stage is that it's just so slow. It feels like this entire zone takes an hour to get through, absolutely not at all helped by each zone having 3 acts. But also, the stage just doesn't at all use the most basic Sonic mechanics. Sonic's gameplay is entirely momentum based. You know, got these slopes that slow you down as you run up them and give you speed if you roll down them. It's simple and insanely intuitive. And every level so far has followed this. Green Hill and its loops, Spring Yard and its big U-shaped dips, and even Marble Zone to some extent with a lot of slopes earlier on in the level. The Labyrinth Zone just throws all of that out the window. The whole zone is boring and slow. I'm not even sure the zone has any slopes. It's all blocky and basic. Fits the theme, no doubt, but I can't help feel like it's so insanely poorly designed and misses the entire point of the game. A majority of the zone is just pressing switches, standing on platforms, waiting and suffering through painful underwater sections. This is how you do a platforming water level wrong. Oh, and that's not even to mention the quote-unquote boss fight for this zone. It's hardly even a boss. Even if you hit Robotnik 8 times here, you don't win. No, instead, you have to climb through this tight as hell maze with poorly placed traps, and these spears are awkward to navigate around. Not to mention that the water is rising the entire time, making it really stressful as you have the opportunity to drown and lose a large chunk of your progress into the final act, or even the game as a whole. I only mentioned it in passing earlier, but this game has no save feature, not even a silly little cheat code like in the original Super Mario Bros., where you could at least start from the beginning of the world. If this is your final life and you have 0 continues, you're practically just f***ed. An insanely lackluster boss to cap off an absolutely atrocious zone. Thankfully, my favourite zone is next, Starlight Zone. Just so charming, man. The green contrasting against the dark starry sky, each star gently twinkling. The visuals here go for this under construction type look. A great contrast to the rest of the game for sure. Most of this game has either been supernatural or super industrial, so a zone that's seemingly set in the midst of construction is a really solid idea in terms of theming. The gameplay here is some of the fastest you go across the entire game. The amount of loops and sharp angled ramps greatly outweighs Green Hill and Spring Yard combined. All of this topped off by an absolutely wonderful soundtrack, something which I'm 100% going to come back to later on. The only real issue I have with this zone is that there are far too many bottomless pits, and sometimes you really struggle to gain speed, which contrasts to what I said earlier, I know, but there are some slopes here that are really annoying to get up just because you can't seem to get enough speed. I do really hate the fan gimmick in the first act at times, not really anything too bad, but it can be annoying to navigate around and sometimes you just get randomly thrusted forward. I do, however, really enjoy the seesaw gimmick. This gimmick is really unique and it requires a lot of knowledge on how the game works. You jump here, send the spiky ball up into the air, and move over to the other side of the platform, allowing you to be sprung back up. Very intuitive and really fun to use, honestly, especially during this area's boss fight. Yes, an actual boss fight this time at last. Eggman comes across the screen and drops spike balls on each of the tiltable platforms, to which you can launch either of them or yourself up to hit Eggman. This is genuinely such a fun gimmick. This fight can genuinely be really challenging at times if you're not fantastic with timing, and can lead to it taking a bit longer than expected. Sounds bad, but for me personally, I think it's pretty fun. And now we're back to the really bad zones, as Scrap Brain Zone is up next. Who comes up with the names for these things? Eggman? Like, Green Hill makes sense. Marble? I can believe it since almost the entire building is constructed out of marble or marble adjacent materials. Spring Yard? Sure, plenty of springs here. Labyrinth? You're damn fucking right it is. Starlight? Like, yeah, those are stars and they sure do emit light. But Scrap Brain? I don't see no brains or any scrap really. Doesn't really matter. Just something that came to mind. Scrap Brain has to be quite possibly the worst non-water level in Sonic the Hedgehog. Yes, I still believe that Labyrinth is worse than this, but not by much. This level has so much janky design. Some parts make you go fast, but then thrust you into segments that you A, cannot see, and B, hurt you. Like, okay, thanks, fuck you too. Some of these tunnels have to be the most confusing pathways in this whole game. Forget what I said about these levels being like a generic platformer, these are like a generic bad. This genuinely sucks. And like, I don't just mean to be entirely a bitch, like I love some of the backgrounds here, and additionally the zone looks nice, just doesn't play very nicely. I jump here and this platform just immediately disappears, like thanks, didn't really want to jump there anyway. I fall down here, my fault admittedly, but I get shocked and trapped until this gap opens back up or I have to run all the way back to the start of the segment. And oh, these spinning platforms! Don't get me started on these stupid spinning platforms! They don't stay still for half a second before they lose their collision. The moment they hit this corner part, they just throw you into a pit. Oh, now I get why it's called Scrap Brain, because of how wonky the level design is. It literally turns your brain to scrap. Oh, and also, that's not to mention the third act is just fucking Labyrinth Zone again. Not like just one segment. The whole fucking act is just wide fucking Labyrinth Zone. I can't even beat this shit without the shortcut at the start of the level. I should not have this problem. Ugh. Genuinely one of the worst locations I've ever seen in any video game. Subpar music, awful level design, and a horrible third act. This just leaves an incredibly sour taste in my mouth. Lucky for me, there's still one more zone left. Well, technically, it's just a single boss fight, nothing too interesting. That's right, final zone is, well, just take a guess. How many of you did it take to come up with that one, huh? Since Scrap Brain had no boss fight, this is technically its boss fight. Now, this boss is okay, absolutely doesn't reach the highs of any of the earlier boss fights. I suppose it just barely surpasses the Labyrinth Zone one, since that one isn't even a boss fight, but that isn't a very high bar. This boss takes 8 hits, not too bad, right? That's the exact same hits as every other boss in the game. Well, that becomes a problem when you can be insta-killed with a crushing attack that you don't know whether or not you're gonna die to until it's already happened. 2 pillars come down, meaning there's a double chance for bullshit to happen, and during the intermission between each primary attack, there's a secondary attack. Sounds normal, but you're not given a single ring during this boss fight. Not even the 2011 ground remake of this game from Christian Whitehead are you given a single ring. It's not too hard to avoid these attacks, but it just pisses me off that this is even a problem in the first place. Like, I understand this is supposed to be the final boss and all, but that doesn't mean artificially raising the difficulty of your fight is justified. Whatever, let's move on. Once you beat the boss, that's it. You hit Eggman once more and he's gone for good, I suppose. Sonic then runs through Green Hill Zone with the Flickies watching him in awe, celebrating his heroic victory as he strikes a cool pose. Hey, what do you mean try again? Oh, right, the special stages. I haven't covered the special stages. Sonic the Hedgehog has a set of collectibles called the Chaos Emeralds. In this game, there are 6 of them, one for each zone. You access the special stages by gathering 50 rings in a stage and jumping into this giant floating ring after the goalpost. It's a little hard to jump into the ring at times, God knows I've missed it far too many times, but it's a pretty solid way to get into the special stage. Each special stage consists of a unique maze, which has you navigate to the centre of it to find the Chaos Emerald. There are several power-ups throughout that shift which way the stage is rotating, and these gold spheres, which, contrary to the name, are actually the opposite of what you want to be. Once you reach the center, you grab the Chaos Emerald, the stage gives you motion sickness, and that's it, you have a Chaos Emerald. Pretty cool system, right? No, see, the issue arises when there are only 18 stages total, not including Final Zone, but only 10 opportunities to enter a special stage, since during the third act of a zone, and both acts of Scrap Brain, you cannot enter a special stage. This is made worse when you realise that these special stages control like absolute ass, which makes them unfun and hard. If you do manage to collect all the Chaos Emeralds though, what is your reward? Flowers in the f***ing ending. No, that is not a joke. The only change to the game's ending is that there are flowers in this portion of Green Hill Zone now. Fantastic stuff. So there's, not much else to add. The soundtrack here is pretty nice. I enjoy listening to some of the tracks from the better zones in the game. Love hearing the Green Hill Zone theme, and I sometimes find myself whistling or humming the theme to Starlight Zone. I actually find the tune of Labyrinth Zone to be a good one too. Sometimes find that one ends up stuck in my head for days after replaying it. Not that I, ever replay it or anything. Other than that, nothing too notable. Seems like that's it for Sonic then. I sure hope this game doesn't get a sequel that improves upon it in almost every conceivable way. Son of a